So today I want to talk about Fahrenheit 451, made by Ray Bradbury. Um, it is a response to the Nazi book burnings during the 1930s and 40s, and it is a response to McCarthyism. McCarthyism was when, in the 1950s, when this book was made, the Red Scare was happening, in which America was scared that communists have infiltrated the government and in the arts. And so the senator, Joseph McCarthy, said that there are many communists in our midst and that we should try and find them and that we should push them out of public life and that we should be scared of people who are communists. This led to many people being falsely accused of being a communist, losing their careers over it, and never being rehabilitated. This especially impacted the movie industry, where even though they weren't communists, they were heavily critical of the government and some anti-communist leanings, and therefore, if you're against certain actions of anti-communism, you must be a communist, and they lost their jobs and stuff. It is very reminiscent of the Salem witch trials in the 1600s. But that's why Ray Bradbury made the book, essentially, is to push back on these ideas. But yeah, we follow the protagonist, Guy Montag, and he's a fireman. You know, in real life, when we think of firemen, they stop fire from burning down buildings. Well, this is the future in which buildings do not burn down, they can't. But what firemen do is that they burn books. And Guy Montag enjoys his job. It's very adrenaline rushing. And, it's kind of like, there must be some Americans out there who have shot a gun. It's probably kind of the same idea. You just feel that adrenaline rush. Ooh, I did a thing. And he's walking down one night after his job, and he meets a 17-year-old young girl named Clarice McClellan, who challenges him on if he's truly happy. She's emblematic of a person who doesn't just ask the how to do things, but why. Why do we do these things? Is it good for us? Is it good for society and myself? And if so, why? And, she challenges Guy on if he's truly happy. And Guy has to concede to himself that he really isn't. And so he goes to his house, and his wife Mildred has consumed a lot of sleeping pills to the point of dying. And he calls up handymen, kind of doctors, but not really, where they have these machines that do help with overdosing. But it is a very unsympathetic / unempathetic society where people only care about themselves. And the handyman just asked for the $50 and leave because they gotta help out other people who also want to take their money as well for this self-inflicted trauma. And the next day, we kind of learn the home life situation where Guy Montag goes to work, but before he goes to work, we see that Mildred stays at home and watches cheap interactive TV. She has 3 TVs and asks Montag for a 4th, even though they just bought a 3rd. And all she does is look at cheap interactive TV and things like pornography, things that don't really make you think. In this society, thinking, it's not outlawed, but it is heavily discouraged from just the types of media that are allowed and the types of types of media that are banned. Yeah, he goes to work, and we see a fireman named Beatty, who is by far the best character in this book, and he heavily supports the system. He and Montag burn this one house who has an old woman in it, and they try and burn the house. The woman won't leave though, because because in this society they actually want the people to stay alive. It's not like 1984 where they just kill everybody. It's not as brutal as that, but the woman won't leave no matter how much they try and get her. And once they have all the kerosene around, she lights the match and burns herself along with the books. To me, that's kind of reminiscent of how people would burn themselves in India when India wanted to be independent from the British, and how they would burn themselves alive, killing themselves, so that they could escape from the British Raj and become its own country. Yeah, this gets Montag to think about how important these books are. I mean, if you saw somebody kill themselves over this idea that books should not be burned, you think that there should be something, there's something having to do with these books, you know? So he does that. He steals a book and takes it with him. Beatty kind of knows this. So when Montag is off work, he calls in sick the next day so that he could read this book. Beatty comes to his house and kind of threatens him, but he makes the argument on why books should be burned. His argument is that books should be burned because they cause unhappiness, and that he uses his wife as an example, how his wife is super happy just consuming this cheap entertainment TV, and how minority groups, especially because in society, as there's more people in the population, there are also more minority groups. Those minority groups get slightly bigger, and how that those minority groups, if these books can upset them and therefore make them unhappy. And so we should burn all the books so that everybody's happy and that everybody is equal. The main argument that I would have against Beatty is that this doesn't have true happiness. This is just instant gratification. If you're ever, and you can see this in real life, I mean, if you have TikTok or YouTube or whatever, any social media that has especially like short form content where you just scroll and scroll and scroll, are you truly happy with yourself? Gets you thinking, like, is this the best way to spend my time? I mean, I'm not saying that it's wrong or anything. I'm just saying that I don't think that people who do that, especially if that's their main entertainment of the day, I don't think they're truly happy with themselves, and it's just a way to pass the time. After a little while, that can get old, and it's not really like a hobby. You're not really interacting with other people saying, "Ooh, I like this stuff." It's just something that you do and you keep on doing mindlessly. You don't think. But what got me thinking about this, though, is that the thing that he says with the minority groups, I absolutely agree with them. Especially on the internet where cancel culture seems to be a very big thing. It's disheartening for a person to have an opinion, and just a simple opinion. Maybe it's a political opinion you just have a disagreement with, but you piss off the wrong person, all of a sudden they're like, fuck you, fuck your family, fuck your job. I'm gonna call your work so that you cannot financially sustain yourself nor your family. And it's just what this book demonstrates pretty well and how it has aged well is that even though we have all this technology, we seem to be further and further and further apart, and that there's not really community anymore. It's just what is your community is these small bubbles where you have to agree with everything that I say. And that truly does discourage thinking. I'm not right on everything, nor will I ever be. But I appreciate it if people have a disagreement and then we talk about that. Not just fuck you, I'm always right, and I'm gonna make it my mission to hurt you as much as possible. It's kind of sad, but he got that right. The writer of the book, he understood that, and from the 1950s, that's pretty good. I mean, it's a pretty good prediction. But yeah, at the end of this first chapter, we learned that he didn't just take that one book, but he stole multiple books. So the second chapter begins, and we kind of do a flashback where Guy Mons had to let this professor named Mr. Faber go when he had a book, in case if he wanted to fall back onto it. And he does eventually see Mr. Faber again, because the book that he stole from the woman, from the woman's bookshop, was a copy of the Bible. And he didn't know it, but he wanted to see if Mr. Faber knew about it. And so they hatched this plan to save as many books as possible, and also maybe just get more people into the cause of think more critically, and that books are actually a good thing for society. So they try and do that, and he goes by his work and says, yeah, they burned it. And it's pretty normal for his work day. And then he goes back home, and his wife and her friends are there consuming the cheap interactive TV. And we just see the shallowlessness of relationships. It becomes really shallow when Guy Montag asked his wife, do you really know these people? Do you guys actually interact without that TV? Do you guys do something else? And she's just like, no, not really. They only meet for the cheap interactive TV. The friendships are not real. And he does a step beyond this, where they talk to the wives and they have disagreeing opinions, but they all agree that if their husbands die from war, which there is a war going on, but nobody really talks about it. You just have jets flying overhead. But if her husband dies, then just marry another person. It's just that easy, right? And that they disagree on having children, where one says just children are just the absolute worst, and the other one says that you should have children just so that you yourself can feel happy. And it's not that much of a hassle. You only see them once a week, which is so unempathetic. We also learn that Clarice McClellan, the 17-year-old girl earlier, died from a car crash, and that the car just kept on going out. And that is talked about a lot with cars and such, where they go as fast as humanly possible because they don't care about people, and it's the most adrenaline rushing thing, essentially. And that, it just feels good. I mean, if it feels good, you must be happy, right? It's not just instant gratification or anything. But yeah, this pisses off Montag, where he basically calls out all the women and says that there has to be more to life. And he shares a poem with them about how beautiful literature can be. And even though it's a sorrowful experience, the poem, I forgot the poem off the top of my head, but it does go to show how important connections can be to people. But to them, but to the women, it's just sad, so therefore, reading's actually awful. And then the next thing happens, he goes back to work, and they're about to burn a house. And it turns out to be Montag's house himself, which leads us to chapter 3. In which there are only 3 chapters in this book. The book's only 150 pages. The author himself said that this is like a dime novel, which a dime novel was like essentially a dime novel, which was a book that used to be worth just a dime, very short books, in the 1800s. Think of 1880s, things like that. But yeah, his wife ratted him out, essentially. And he is forced to burn his house down. And his wife leaves him. He leaves immediately, and it's said that his wife completely forgets about him, which goes to show the shallowness of relationships. And, it's, like I said, it's sad before, but he burns down the house, or tries to, and is kind of forced to. But then he goes around and burns Beatty. And Beatty doesn't really trying to defend himself. He just lets it happen, which to me emphasizes that he was very unhappy with his life, even if he couldn't admit it himself. If it just, especially a horrible, gruesome death that would be. So, in the story, there's this metal doll thing that tries and finds books, and that stabs Montag in the leg, and Montag burns it, and then he runs away. He runs away, tries to find Mr. Faber, and they have one last talk and alcohol. And he decides to leave the city entirely because there are a bunch of homeless intellectuals out there who are camping out outside the cities, and the government just won't try and find them because they don't see the point, because they're not big enough to hurt their rule. So he runs away, finds the intellectuals, and they discuss all the books and stuff and how literature is important. And that war I was talking about earlier, well, it comes ahead, and it only lasts a day, where we don't really know the nations, but Montag's nation destroys all the enemy nation's ships, but the enemy nation in return uses essentially an atomic bomb and completely obliterates the city that he was in. So if the metaphor's not getting to people yet, the book's literally saved his life. But yeah, and at the end, we essentially get the story of the Phoenix, which, if you don't know, the Phoenix could live immortally forever, but was sick of life because it was the same thing over and over again, and decided to give up its immortality so that there could be a new rebirth of the world. And they used that and that's a metaphor for how they're going to rebuild society and actually preserve books. And that's the end. That's the end of the book. It's very much closer to day-to-day life than 1984 is, in my opinion. 1984, that's more specifically towards government stuff, and if you live in a totalitarian regime. But since I'm assuming most of the people watching, and I myself, do not live in a totalitarian regime, but we do have just instant ways of giving us self-gratification. This book really does contribute and say a lot more about our life right now than 1984 did, even though both are really important. Beatty's monologue is by far the best part in the book, in my opinion. Him saying how minority groups they feel like they can't, like how society and minority groups just can't handle opposite opinions, and therefore you gotta coddle them to keep social stability, and I've seen that, especially with cancel culture and things like that. I definitely agree, and it's a shame. Really, it is. I feel like everybody can benefit from looking at opposite ideas, and then you yourself decide, is that a good idea or not? But people can't handle that. They gotta feel like they're in their own little bubble. I'm always right. You say I'm wrong? Nope, I'm in this bubble. And you're actually just an enemy. Even if it's just one little thing, you're an enemy now. When Beatty dies, the book does feel like it just dramatically goes down in quality, you know? And another thing too is about the book is that even though, ironically, the book is about how we should preserve books and reading more, the book itself feels more like a movie. Like, it feels like it would felt better if this was a movie than an actual book, especially at the end, because it's just him running to try and get out of the city, and the rest of it, and previously before that, it's a lot of dialogue. It's not really like inner reading where it's just setting and characters thinking to themselves or anything like that. It's a lot of it's dialogue, and a lot of it is pure action. I mean, but the book was spot on about how people seem to not be, how people seem more want self-gratification and think that's happiness. You know, this book definitely has more similarities to A Brave New World than it does 1984. I've read A Brave New World, but the reason why I didn't make a review on it is because I personally didn't like it, even though I would say that book says a lot about our society, and says a lot of good points. It can just be a little too much for people like me, and I feel like it should have had way more disclaimers than it did, because it has some subjects that I didn't like reading about. Therefore, I didn't make it, because I felt like it would have been an unfair book review. But I would give this book, I'm stuck in between a 5 out of 10 and a 6 out of 10. I think I'd have to give it a 5 out of 10, honestly. For a classic, it doesn't have that writing, which is a shame, because it gets a lot of ideas right, in my opinion. But yeah, with the self-gratification, and it's even more prevalent and needing to know about its ideas today than it was back in the 50s. Like, it's aged tremendously well. It's just, in my opinion, it's not that well written, which is a shame to say the least. But yeah, 5 out of 10. Yeah, it feels like, it kind of does feel like the opposite of 1984. Like I said, how in 1984, the best part by far in 1984 is the ending. Not because it's a bad book, but without 1984's ending, 1984 would not be remembered. And I feel like that's why 1984 is more remembered than Fahrenheit 451. Because, I mean, Fahrenheit's ending, even though it ends off with an atomic explosion, it's just, once Beatty dies, it's just, and the writing is just not there. Like, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to say what it could have been better. I just read the book, and I mean, I guess all I can say is don't make it as movie-esque as this book was. I mean, just take that as you will, I guess. But yeah, 5 out of 10. If you haven't read dystopian literature, this is probably the best to first get into. I would say I probably would have liked the book more if I read this first than Animal Farm in 1984 and Brave New World, as I read that before. This is gonna be the last of my dystopian literature, at least for a long time, because the book has taught me to think. I mean, I've been reading kind of the same stuff, and I need to broaden my horizons. It's good for people to expand on their stuff. So that's what I'm gonna be doing for a little bit. I've been reading some Lord of the Rings, and that may be my next book video, you know? But yeah, it's an okay book. Easy read too. Yeah, that's it. So have a good day.